They laughed as the cuffs clicked shut, mocking a man who had done nothing but exist in the wrong skin. To them, he was powerless, another name to be forgotten. But life has a way of turning tables. What the officers didn't know was that the same man they humiliated would soon hold their future in his hands. In the silence of the courtroom, when he rose to speak, every smirk vanished. How did a man in chains become the one in charge? This is that story. Before that night, he lived a life as ordinary as anyone else. A father, a husband, a neighbor, he walked with quiet confidence, never needing to prove who he was. His mornings began with coffee and the hum of the city. His evenings ended with books stacked neatly on his desk, the faint glow of a lamp marking his late-night work. He was a man who believed in fairness, who carried himself with dignity even when the world often failed to show it in return. On that day, he had just left a small gathering with friends. Dressed simply, his briefcase at his side. The streets were calm, yet something in the air felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. He didn't notice the patrol car at first, parked just beyond the corner. Nor did he see the stairs that followed his every step. To him, it was just another walk home. But in the shadows of that evening, judgment had already been cast. Eyes that saw only color, not character, had already decided his worth. And soon, the simple act of heading home would become a test of how deep injustice could cut. The sound of tires crunching against the pavement pulled him from his thoughts. Blue and red lights flared behind him, spilling across the street like an uninvited spotlight. The officer's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet night. Hands where we can see them. Confused, he froze. His briefcase slipped slightly in his hand. He had done nothing, no broken law, no reckless act, but suddenly he was no longer a man walking home. In their eyes, he was a suspect, someone to be controlled. The cuffs were cold against his skin. The laughter came next low at first, then louder, echoing like cruel music in the still night. They mocked his silence, joked about his clothes, sneered at the way he tried to keep calm. To them, this wasn't an arrest. It was entertainment. Neighbors peeked from their windows, some shaking their heads, others turning away. Phones recorded, but no one stepped forward. The humiliation stung more than the metal biting into his wrists. He kept repeating in his mind, "Stay calm. Do not let them see you break." At the station, the paperwork dragged on, each page filled with lies crafted to justify their actions. Resisting arrest, suspicious behavior, words designed to stain a man's reputation. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about the power they held in that moment. Hours passed before he was released, his dignity bruised but his resolve unshaken. The laughter still echoed in his ears, but beneath it grew something stronger, a quiet determination. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that this man was not just anyone. His days were not defined by these officers, and his story did not end in that cell. In fact, it was only beginning. Weeks later, the courtroom buzzed with chatter as the officers entered, confident smirks still carved into their faces. To them, this was routine, another hearing, another chance to bend the truth. But as the bailiff called for silence and the room stood, all eyes shifted to the bench, and then he walked in. The same man they had cuffed, mocked, and dismissed as nothing more than a shadow in the night. But here, he wore no chains. Here, he wore the robe of authority. He was the judge. The air snapped with tension as recognition hit the officers like a tidal wave. Their laughter vanished. Their swagger melted into shock. The same hands they had bound were now the hands that would decide their fate. He sat with measured calm, his gaze steady, his voice firm as he began the proceedings. Every word carried weight, not because of anger, but because of the dignity they had once tried to strip from him. The power imbalance had shifted. The very men who thought themselves untouchable now stood exposed, their arrogance dissolving under the quiet strength of justice. And as silence filled the courtroom, it became clear this was no longer about one man. It was about every man and woman who had ever been mocked, cuffed, or humiliated without cause. The moment was bigger than the arrest. It was the collapse of unchecked arrogance. When the final gavel struck, The sound echoed louder than any laughter ever could. Justice had spoken not through rage, but through calm authority. The officers who once mocked him were left staring at the floor, their careers and reputations unraveling in silence. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. His strength had never been in revenge, but in showing that dignity cannot be broken by handcuffs or laughter. He walked out of that courtroom the same man he had always been, only now the world had seen what true power looks like, spread far beyond the courthouse. It wasn't just about one arrest gone wrong. It was about the hidden faces of injustice and the truth that arrogance cannot survive when confronted with resilience. For those who had once turned away, it was a reminder. For those who had endured similar pain, it was a spark of hope, because in the end, this wasn't only his victory. It was proof that silence can speak louder than cruelty and that tables always turn. The question that lingers is this: how many more stories like his will it take before the laughter stops for good?